I'm proud of you all for braving this strange weather that we're having today, and the wind and all. I'm Joanne Britton, and I'm very happy to welcome you all here to the Bucket Class. Before we get started, I just want to remind you to silence your cell phones, turn on T-coil if that works for you, and at the end of our event this morning, if you are able, if you would help put away chairs, there'll be places to put them up here or in the back. And if there is any discussion or questions, there will be a microphone walked around so that you may ask your questions into the microphone so that we can all hear you. All right? Now, I don't really need to introduce our speaker this morning because you all know him, but I will anyway. Most of you know that J.R. Paulson is a recently retired family practitioner, having served the Grinnell community for 42 years. As a family practice physician, longtime director of hospice, and mental health advocate, his view of medicine is holistic and focuses not just on the physical, but also on the mental and social elements that affects people's health. In today's lecture, Dr. Paulson will explore the subject of mind control and whether individuals or groups can influence the minds of others. Here is JR. Let's welcome him.
Thank you all for being here and for braving the weather. How's the sound in the back? Oh, good. Okay, well, let's get rocking and rolling. Zombies, mind control. Is there a fungus among us? I've always been interested in mind control and telepathy. Can you understand another person's mind or read it? But this isn't going to have anything to do with telepathy. Hypnosis. I studied hypnosis a bit and actually thought seriously of learning it as a tool to have in my medical bag, but I never did. I did use it several times in the ER, however, to good effect, to a young child and once to a chronic schizophrenic patient who thought he had a transceiver in his brain. Contrary to popular belief, though, you can't be hypnotized to do things against your will. You can't be forced into a hypnotic state either. Instead, you allow yourself to be hypnotized. It's not a voluntary altering of your own consciousness, and you are always in control. But can you manipulate someone else's brain like a puppet? This topic is not just of interest to scientists, but obviously to governments. And they started many years ago, 50, 60 years ago, in England, trying to decide if mind-controlled technology could have a use. Loyalty to the emperor or country. We all know that the Japanese could do this with some of their pilots in World War II. And we all know what the kamikazes were. And they just had half a tank of gas, and it was to head out and find a destroyer or part of the fleet and crash into it. Well, that's not exactly mind control, but it's a suicidal behavior. Anybody in this room saw this 1962 movie, The Manchurian Candidate? Raise your hand. Yes, very classic. It came out in '62, right in the middle of the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's important to know. There was a remake done in 2004 with an excellent stellar cast, including Denzel Washington and Meryl Streep. Raymond Shaw is brainwashed, as the plot in the movie, in communist China when his platoon is captured in Korea in 1952. And he's really mind-controlled and brainwashed and is turned into a political assassin. And if you haven't seen the updated movie, that's also excellent. Following a few years later, another movie, Men Who Stare at Goats. Anybody seen this movie? Also, very interesting. With a stellar cast also. It's based on actual U.S. Army investigation into the paranormal activities, such as walking through walls, remote viewing, and they had one person who said he could just stare at a goat, and with his own telepathy, the goat would die. Hence the name of the movie, Goats. Well, the United States and the CIA took this seriously, and they had this project with people that supposedly had this ESP and took them to remote places, and they tried to get this to work out for up to 20 years. It was called MK Ultra, run by the CIA. What about paranoia? I already told you I saw many paranoid people in my practice. This person thinks he's being controlled by someone from outside himself, and he's getting these signals from God, aliens, who knows what. So he has a tinfoil hat, of course, to deflect the interference with that. Brain implants could also give governments and companies power to read your mind. And we're now coming in the age where, yes, brain implants are possible. However, despite all the high tech, as you know, I just finished my 2 bucket classes on bullshit. And I think that's the most likely way that most people's minds are controlled. And I've shown this before, but I'm going to show it again. With this TV, I will no longer have to think for myself. I look forward to adopting the ideas, perceptions of reality that is broadcast from the signal. A life of mindless trivia, sports, celebrity gossip, insecurities, and material possessions are just a click away. Remember when this came out with TV in the 50s? And of course, I just scratched out the television and put with this smartphone. And I think everything follows. What about zombies? Isn't that really a form of minds being taken over by someone or something else? You can tell I'm into movies because the first zombie movie was 1968. We'll see how many of you saw this. George Romero's movie Night of the Living Dead was released and was really the first zombie movie, although he never used the term zombie. Anybody ever see Night of the Living Dead? Good. It's kind of scary. What then is the definition of a zombie? The origin of the term probably first comes from Haiti. And they're featured, of course, in Haitian folklore as persons that have been revived, and they're controlled by a boker, a sorcerer, or witch. And they have no will of their own and under the complete control of the boker. But the definition can be expanded into mind control of the undead, too. And as the star shows here, modern media depictions of the reanimation of the dead often don't involve magic like Haitian Hindu magic, but rather science fiction methods such as carriers, fungus, radiation, mental diseases, vectors, pathogens, parasites, scientific accidents in the lab, etc. Mind control cats. Can my cats, or any other cats for that matter, control my behavior? Linda would probably say yes. I get my cats when they want food, when they want to go outside, when they want to be petted. Yes, they control my behavior. So they do have some mind control. Can insects or arthropods control our behavior? Where are examples where control of the minds or behavior of a similar or different species occur, other than Homo sapiens? So, middle part of this, we're going to not stop on people. We're going to go back and see if there are other animals that control other species. That's the theme for the paper. So on the tree of life, of course, we look up at the top where we're more intelligent with the mammals and all the other plants and animals we're not too excited about. We can train and control other animals, right? Pretty well, but only up to a point. Behavior and instincts. How much is really hardwired and how much is malleable? Now, this is a picture, obviously, of a beaver dam and a beaver lodge. all of us know that the beaver characteristics are all encoded in its genes. And the tail and the buck teeth and the fur, all of that is determined by the genes, correct? What about the behavior? Well, what do beavers do? They cut trees down, they make dams on rivers and streams to back up water to a certain height so they can build beaver dams. So in the winter, they can go in the beaver dams with their little ones, with stored food, and live and do well, right? Who taught the beavers how to do that? The baby beavers, it's not like monkeys or other primates where they learn it from their parents. This is an instinct, correct? And beavers who don't follow that, who don't work like a beaver, who are lazy, and say, well, it's a nice day, I don't think I'll cut any trees down today, they don't end up doing too well, do they, when winter comes? So, genes control instinct and behavior. Richard Dawkins was a pioneer in gene theory. He's best known for popularization of the gene as the principal unit of selection in evolution. And it's most seen in two of his books, one in 1976, and the second one 6 years later in 82, which he describes natural selection as a process whereby replicators outpropagate each other. In other words, you do a good job of this, you're just going to make more of your offspring. Duh, not a hard concept. However, he went so far to say that, make sure I don't screw this up, that there's phenotype. That means the gene, effects of a gene are not necessarily limited to an organism's body, but can stretch into the environment, including the bodies of other organisms. So this idea of extended phenotype is like, well, wait a minute, how are my genes going to get into some other animal or control it? Well, that was a pretty wild out theory at that time. Now, remember, when this was well before we mapped the human genome, did gene analysis, had PCR, or did gene editing with CRISPR? Can one species change or control some of another animal's instinct or behavior by messing with their genes? Can you even change the behavior enough to endanger or actually cause the death or suicide of another species or host? So now we're going to talk about parasitism. Parasitism is a symbiotic relationship. In the relationship, one organism, the parasite, benefits while the host may be harmed. And the parasites live exclusively in their host organisms. Now, at the bottom it says it's different from predation, because if you're a predator, you eat and kill. You don't live with what you kill or harm. Now, it can form different relationships. We're all familiar with some of these. Ticks and dogs, hookworms and humans, aphids and plants, cuckoo in another bird's nest, barnacles and whales, leeches and humans. But they all are a symbiosis. They all can have different outcomes. So one of them is mutualism. This is a win-win situation for the host and the parasite. Flowers get pollinated and bees get honey. Win-win. Commensalism, where one, the host, doesn't really get harmed, but the free rider, in this case the barnacle, gets advantage by being hooked onto the whale. Or parasitism, where a cat or dog has fleas, gets blood sucked from them, really doesn't do too much benefit for the cat, but does for the tick. So let's start down low on the biologic tree of life, the flatworm. This is a species of flatworm. That's what it looks like under the microscope. It can be seen without a microscope. And its definitive host is a heron. I don't know whether it has to be a blue heron or not, but it's a heron. That's where it's got to live and wants to live. But it also uses the ram-horned snails as its intermediate host. But the frog also plays a pivotal role as a secondary intermediate host. So in the cycle, you have the snail, the heron. Heron defecates and into the ponds, and then the eggs go into the snail, and then they form the cercariae, and they go out and swim, and they go and find a tadpole in a frog, and then as the tadpole develops, you get this weird frog. And the frog develops with extra deformed hind legs. So here's this frog with 5 or 6 legs. Duh, that's pretty impressive. Well, this of course makes great pickings for a hungry heron, and is a really clever way to make it more likely to get back into its primary host, the heron. So here's the fluke changing the behavior biologically through intermediate hosts to get eaten by a heron. How do flukes manipulate their hosts? In the Carpentaria salt marshes in Southern California lives another fluke. It is a life cycle that induces 2 intermediate hosts. The first is the horned snail and the California killifish, and a final host which can be any type of fish-eating birds. It doesn't have to be a heron. And they have been discovered to host a mind-sucking parasite that alters the behavior in order to further its own species, which is the theme. These zombie fish are infected with this fluke, a small parasitic worm that reproduces in the guts of the seabirds. Flukes are able to limit the production of serotonin in the fish's brain, which makes the fish very restless. Ordinarily shy of the surface and its dangers, infected fish actively swim near the surface and even flick the water with their tails, greatly enhancing the chances of getting plucked out and eaten by a bird. So there's a killifish, and again, the cycle from primary host, eggs, secondary host, the snail. Now, the snail is the first host, and as we just said, the definitive host is the birds. And when they're eaten by the snail, they divert all the snail's reproductive capacity to make more snails and to make these cercariae. And then the cercariae seek out the next host, the killifish, latch into the fish's gills, and each cercariae works its way into a blood vessel and explores until it finds a nerve, which it then follows to reach the fish's brain. Cercariae don't go into the brain, however. They sit on top of it, and they secrete chemicals into the brain and affect the serotonin. And they wait for the fish to be eaten by a bird. Once eaten by a bird, they break out of the fish's head, move into the bird's gut, where they reproduce eggs and continue the cycle. In field experiments where they have penned fish that were made available to birds, they found that the birds infected by this parasite were 30 times more likely to be eaten than unaffected. So, Darwinian advantage. This fluke has figured this out. This fluke changes its behavior to increase its species. Let's talk about a third flatworm who changes one of its intermediate hosts' appearance and behavior, both. So this epigenetic thing, we're going to change behavior and appearance. How to keep from being eaten by a predator. Birds especially. If you're a snail, that could be a hard job. Besides pulling into a hard shell, you want to stay inconspicuous and close to the ground in dark green foliage covered environment. You don't want to make any attention out there. And note the eye stalks on the, see the long eye stalks on the snail? Not very impressive. This is what you, as a snail, don't want to happen. However, as a fluke, this is exactly what you want to happen. So it was a fluke. You got to figure out, what could I do to make this scenario that happens more likely? How can the lowly fluke make this more likely? Well, snails get infected with this parasite when the bird's droppings and the parasite eggs. And this parasitic worm then infects the snails. Inside the snail, the parasite grows and then tunnels into the eye stalks of the animal. Here it pumps embryos into fat, throbbing brood sacs. It builds in the eye stalks, turning the appendages into bright green-banded, pulsating beams that look like caterpillars. And with these colorful pulsating eye stalks may be attractive to the birds, they also need to be able to find the snail. If it's way down in the undergrowth, they still may not see it or find it. So the parasite is involved to help its host out of the darkness by influences the snail's tiny brain to reduce its natural aversion to light. So this is a picture of a snail that's been infected, and you can see the eye stalks don't look the same here at all. And this is what they finally look like. And this is a picture I did of a video. And in the video, those bands go up and down, and they change colors. I mean, talk about like, hey, do I look like a caterpillar here? So the parasite produces both anatomic and behavioral changes in one of its hosts. The combination makes it much more likely to get back into its primary host, in this case, a bird, correct? What about zombie crickets? Ever heard of zombie cricket? Can you make another animal actually do kamikaze behavior or suicide? Well, some of you farmers in there are probably familiar with horsehair worms. And they're found in aquatic habitats from lakes and rivers to small puddles and water containers on farms. Most of them are freshwater, but some are in salt water. Common name comes from their resemblance to hair of a horsetail. The adult female horsehair worm releases millions of eggs into the water. They hatch into larvae. These parasitize an insect host by being eaten by the insect in the water or by burrowing into the host. If the host is a small aquatic invertebrate, such as a midge, it completes its life cycle out of water, the larva remains dormant. When the midge emerges as an adult and dies on land, it's scavenged by terrestrial insects, such as a cricket or grasshopper. And then inside the terrestrial host, the larva grows its adult length. It remains coiled inside the intestinal host until the unfortunate insect is driven to the water by unknown process. And then in the water, the horsehair worm emerges from its host and begins its aquatic phase. So, swimming around in the water, eggs, larvae, they get into the insect, looks like perhaps a mosquito larva, gets up on land, crickets eat it, the larvae come out and then grow in the belly of the still live cricket. Remember, you don't want to kill your host. And this is what the wad of the worms look like. Look at them packed in that cricket. I'd like to be that cricket. And here's just one of the worms coming out of the cricket. But crickets don't swim. So what suicidal instinct to dive into water is being created? How does that zombie-like mind control work? Hairworms. Hairworms start their life in rivers and ponds. They make their larvae get into the bodies of insects. These insects host then grow wings and exit the water, where predators such as the praying mantis lie in wait. If an infected insect is eaten by a mantis, the hairworm will then produce and grows its mature size in the mantis. So, here's an example of what happens that we just talked about. It's very similar, but this time the mantis is the host. So you're in the water, larva, you get into an aquatic flea or something, takes off, maybe it's a mayfly, goes, the mantis is sitting up here eats the guys, comes out in the mantis's stomach, and starts growing big, mature worm. But it's got to get back in the water. Worms can grow up to 90 centimeters long. That's a big worm to cram into a praying mantis. But if the worm comes out on dry land, the chance of the worm surviving is not very good. It's going to dry up on the pavement, or a bird's going to come by and say, there it is. So that's not going to work. So we have to induce the praying mantis to do a death dive into water, but it can't swim. And then if it goes into water, it obviously can come out, mantis dies, but the worms take off. Now, the mechanism why mantises would do this is even more complicated. And they haven't known for 100 years. But thanks to biologic scientists in Kyoto, Japan, they kind of figured out what's going on here. Because one of the issues is the mantis goes into water, but it doesn't go into shallow water. It doesn't just go into a little puddle or a rain like we have out there someplace. It's going to go into deeper water, because otherwise it could dry up, evaporate, or be seen pretty easily if it's a shallow thing. So how does the mantis to say, I'm only going to go into water, but I'm going to go into deep water? Well, the hypothesis was positive polotaxis. So what the heck is that? Well, as many of you know, waves from light from the sun come unpolarized, which means the waves beat this way, and they beat this way, and they beat all these different angles. When you put on your polarized sunglasses, you're only allowing one plane of that to come through. And if you look through polarized glasses at different things, things look differently. Water looks differently. Deeper water looks differently. So they said, let's do an experiment. So they made a light on the one side here, and they polarized the light on one part, left the middle the same, and unpolarized it the other. And what they found is, gee, with the polarized light, part of it looks like this, but because the waves are like this, but at the other end, it doesn't look like that. So they showed that this happens. Well, now you got to go in the real world. So what they did is build a couple ponds. And this is what it looks like through polarized light, or a praying mantis who's seeing polarized light, what the left one and the right one look like. Pretty different, right? Well, then you get some mantises, and you put them out there, and you see which one do they dive into. Duh, the majority of them all head for the polarized light. Hence, the deeper water. And they also found that they trick the mantises, not just any time. Let's just go in when the sun is the highest. Don't go at 9 o'clock or 3 in the afternoon. Let's go around. So they plotted when the mantises went in the water. And this is the graph of that. Pretty close to noon when the sun is straight up. Remarkable insect control over their hosts. So let's move on to wasps. So we're going to talk about the Dinocampus wasp and our good friend the ladybug. Ladybugs don't taste very good because they secrete noxious fluid from their leg joints, as do Asian beetles. But ladybugs eat aphids. They're not pests. They don't congregate. They don't come inside in the winter. And birds don't eat them. But you see, nature has made the Asian ladybug look a lot like it, so the birds go like, ew, I don't want to eat this. But so the stuff that you see around your house that you're not happy with are not ladybugs. So Dinocampus stings under the beetle's carapace with a curved stinger. And it does three things. It injects venom, one egg, and a virus. Boy, that's a pretty fancy cocktail. The wasp larva hatches inside, and as it grows, it consumes the inside of the ladybug, its fat reserves, and its reproductive organs. But it leaves the other organs that are critical for survival. So it eats everything else in there, but it doesn't eat anything that's going to kill the ladybug. Once the wasp has grown enough, it emerges from the ladybug, and then the virus that's injected, that's been laying dormant, turns on, is activated. The wasp quickly spins its cocoon, because it's out of the ladybug now, between the ladybug's legs. But the ladybug doesn't bother. It just says, oh, okay. But it rather induces the ladybug to wrap its legs around the cocoon and then essentially paralyzes it, except for some wiggling of the legs, in an immobile thick barrier against threats, with bright red warning coloration to boot. The wasp needs the ladybug to remain alive, though, as having a corpse, a dead ladybug wrapped around a cocoon, really make much difference. So here's a schematic and of the pupa inside the, and then the viruses inside the body of the ladybug. Meanwhile, the virus is now activated in the brain, causing a near complete paralysis. Until this time, the ladybug's been moving around, eating, feeding, because you want to keep it healthy. So, and here comes the larva out after 20 days, and it spins its cocoon, and the ladybug wraps its legs around the cocoon and sits there and protects it. But if another predator comes by, it'll move or flick so you know it's not dead. And it shakes and keeps other wasps or predators away. And because reproduction is parthenogenic, which means you don't need a male wasp around to reproduce, in about a month, a female wasp emerges out of the pupa and flies off to find another ladybug. And believe it or not, up to 25% of these ladybugs still live after all this has gone on inside them, which I find amazing. Now their manipulation of a host by a wasp. This time it's the emerald jewel wasp. And I consider this one a master chemist and neurosurgeon. This is the wasp who went to medical school. I'm serious, and you will see why. So, it stings a cockroach. The American cockroach is all it's looking for. It doesn't want to kill it, but wants it alive to feed its larva. It wants it in its nest, which it hasn't made yet. How to accomplish this? You're a wasp. Well, you turn it over on its back and you sting it. And you sting it first in the first thoracic ganglia that temporarily paralyzes the front legs. Then you go up and sting it by the brain, where you're going to zombify it. And we'll see what that means. Then your third set of stings, your third and fifth, you go down in the lower part of the thoracic ganglion, and you inject a toxin that only causes the big legs to extend out. Not paralyze them completely, but to be locked in complete extension. Okay? So here's a picture of the wasp rummaging around in the brain with its stinger. It's filling in there until it finds the exact anatomical spot in the brain that it wants, and then injects a venom cocktail and viruses. So this is the anatomy, if you ever wondered, of a cockroach. Well, I'm pretty impressed that the wasp does this with all the precision of a trained neurosurgeon. You know, a neurosurgeon did go in, or an anesthesiologist, and he found where to numb my back for my hip that I had a couple weeks ago, and I was glad that he knew where he was going in the right spot. But this is far more complex, and you're putting different chemicals in different spots. Now, these three injections, the neurotoxin cocktail, produce a short-term paralysis, grooming, and zombification. After 3 or more injections, the wasp bites off half of each of the antennae and sucks the fluid in there called hemolymph to replenish herself. Then flies away to look for a burrow and says, I better find a place that I'm going to stash this guy. either one that's already made, an old can, or I'll make a burrow. Not worried about the cockroach going away because of what you put in it. Cockroach just sits there, but grooms itself, just waiting for the wasp to come back. So the wasp returns then and leads the roach gently by pulling on an antenna stalk, just like leading a dog on a leash, into the burrow or cavity it is found or made. The cockroach now walks completely normally. And here's a picture, video is pretty impressive to watch, of this wasp just leading this big cockroach over to its nest. It then lays one egg on the paralyzed leg that it just made now and makes a tomb, in other words, seals up its chamber to keep outside predators. Not because the cockroach is going to run away. It's just going to stay there. It's still alive. But to keep other predators out. In 2 days, the egg hatches on the leg and burrows into the abdomen of the cockroach. It feeds on the internal organs. We've heard this story before. But leaves the nervous system for last. It eats everything else in there. Now it pupates, turns into a pupa for a month, and then emerges as another adult female wasp, ready to look for a new host. So this is just in a laboratory, and here's the picture of, as you can see, here's the cockroach, and the wasp doesn't show up very well. This is the wasp just putting all these stones in here, packing it in there for a nice little burrow. And outside, real pictures of what's going on. And here's the little larvae going inside, and then 3 to 5 days it's pupating, and then eventually comes out. So the wasp exits now. It's finally dead host after about 30 days. It just flies off and finds another American cockroach. So I think we'll do one more thing, and then we'll start into viruses, and then we'll take a break. What about viruses? So we're changing from worms to insects to viruses. Can they manipulate an animal's brain and behavior? Baculovirus in gypsy moths. Most of us are familiar with gypsy moths. It's a gypsy moth and some of the eggs around. Normally, gypsy moth caterpillars are active at night, says this professor of entomology. They hide in the daytime in the soil or crevices of the bark to be protected from birds. Then they climb up at night to feed. When infected by a specific baculovirus, this is how it ends its life. Not as a pretty moth, but as a disgusting, decaying, rotting corpse of slime. So if you're a moth and you get this virus, this is what you end up being. Gypsy moths work and die on the day shift. So this virus tricks the nocturnal caterpillar to stay in the treetops during the day. Changes its behavior. And they found out that they use an enzyme that causes caterpillars to climb to the treetops, hang onto a leaf, or bark with their prolegs and die. Pretty impressive behavior change. Then the caterpillars liquefy and rain particles on the leaves that touch or ingest other caterpillars. Infection was labeled treetop disease, but 100 years ago, researchers could not look at either the virus genetic material or the metabolic pathways. But now we know they manipulate the caterpillars an identified EGT. It codes for an enzyme, which inactivates the hormone that triggers molting. Male gypsy moth caterpillars molt 5 times during their life, and the females molt 6 times before they pupate, go into their little cocoons and come back as moths. But infected caterpillars don't molt again once the levels of EGT become too high. It induces the caterpillar also to climb the treetops, hang on to the leaf, and die. Another behavioral change that benefits the virus. Older caterpillars are induced to die on the bark next to their fellow gypsy moths that have pupated and emerged and then walk over the dead cadaver crap, picking up the virus and then transmitting it to more. So it tells these guys, you're not feeling too good, you're old, find a gypsy moth and just die right next to them. Because then when they come out of their cocoon, they're likely to step in you and produce this. So we now know the biochemistry that's going on with this, and you can see the cycle. So this one virus, baculovirus, tells this don't molt, forage and eat in the daytime, go to the top of the trees, hook on with a death grip, don't let go, and if you're going to die, try to find a pupa to die by. These are all changes made in another animal by a virus. So with that, I think your appetite for cookies and things should be pretty well stimulated, and so we'll return in a short time. Yes, thank you. Let's continue on. Still hear me in the back okay? Great. Let's talk more about viruses in mind control. Rabies is another virus that causes dramatic behavioral changes in its host. 60,000 people still die yearly around the world from rabies. It is 100% fatal when advanced symptoms occur. Death is 100% preventable, however, if giving the PEP, human rabies immune globulin, after exposure. Only certain animals carry the virus, as you know. The incubation period varies, usually 2 to 3 months, but may vary from 1 week up to a year, which I didn't know till I did this. Rabies is a viral disease. It's famous for its ability to alter the behavior of infected hosts, rendering them aggressive. Its underlying biologic mechanisms are uncertain, but now we're starting to find out how it works at a molecular level. Most of you know that there are just certain animals that can host the rabies virus, and these are the ones that we're all aware of. There are two forms of rabies. Furious rabies is hyperactivity, excitable behavior, hallucinations, lack of coordination, and hydrophobia, which is fear of water. And also aerophobia, you don't want drafts or winds blowing on you. Once you start having these symptoms, death is inevitable within a few days. Paralytic rabies, which I also hadn't heard of or ever seen, accounts for 20% of the total number of human cases, runs a less dramatic course than the furious form. They become gradually paralyzed, close to the bite. Coma slowly develops over time, and this is often misdiagnosed because it's so slow and people don't see the normal symptoms that they expect with rabies. The virus interacts with muscle receptors. And Dr. Heffler explains that the rabies virus only has 5 genes. I'm very impressed by this statement, so I'm going to linger on it. It has very little information. Dogs have more than 20,000 genes with sophisticated immune and central nervous systems. So wait a minute, you're getting a virus that has 5 genes, and you're going to try to control another organism or high animal that's all got all these other genes, and you're going to accomplish it with these 5 genes. Yet the virus can reprogram a dog's behavior so it loses fear, becomes aggressive, and bites, which allows the virus, of course, to spread through the dog's saliva. Research now reveals how rabies can induce frenzied behavior. And we don't have to go into detail, but there's these receptors, the nicotinic, that can cause that. So, again, including virus, simple virus causes these dramatic changes. Of course, if it gets into people, the same way. And so the early studies of rabies, Pasteur, the book that I gave Dave Ferguson, he works with Pasteur as Pasteur is trying to develop the vaccination for this. and almost gets bitten by one of the humans that he's taking care of with the saliva. And of course, if he gets bitten, then he's in trouble. So we've seen how worms, flukes, wasps, and viruses can change their host behavior for their own advantage. What about another species, once thought to be just a simple class of organisms that lived on decaying matter? Fungi. So, how many people know much about fungi? Are they plants? Are they animals? Are they bacteria? How many people think that they're plants? How many animals? How many bacteria? How many don't know? Always the correct choice. Ooh, sorry. And the answer is its own kingdom. Totally different. So here's life, microorganisms, animals going out this way, plants going this way, and in between fungi. They're different. Totally different than plants and or animals. And you're going to find out their importance. Is there another zombie behavior further down the tree of life? We've been trying to look up viruses, but then in other animals and things. But what's he talking about fungi for? How are they going to change anything? They're neither plants nor animals. They're organisms that produce spores, as you know, of reproduction, survive by feeding on organic matter. Yeast, molds, toadstools, and mushrooms. Prior research shows that there's millions of these, maybe 300 to 400 million. They've really not been studied much, but they need to be. So the fungal tree of life is very complicated, and it looks like this. And so you're going to see a lot of people go into fungi research. Any of you that ever read the book or saw the movie Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne recognize this scene. They're going down farther into the center of the earth, and as they go down deeper, they go back in time. And eventually they see dinosaurs and other things. Well, when they get to this stage, there's giant toadstools there. I don't know if any of you saw this on Facebook or if you're in social media or not, but it says there's a giant mushroom in Oregon's National Forest with a root system that covers 2,200 acres, making it the largest organism in the world. Anybody buying that? That's total bullshit. So you need to go back and take another class again. Because you see this and it looks, totally made up BS. However, if you were able to visit the Earth during the Devonian period, 420 million years ago, and you could cruise by and take a look at the landscape, this is what artists say and you would see. You'd see a few plants, no trees, no soil, and these giant growths of up to 20 to 30 feet high standing up all over. Dr. Francis Huber in Quebec quarry 20 years ago came upon this fossil. And he was the first one to suggest that it was really a giant fungus. It's named Prototaxites. And these dominated the biosphere all over the earth for 40 million years. So these were dominant fungi species. And the fungi made the rock deteriorate. They made the soil. They made it so that plants and trees could come. And of course that had to happen before we could come. So we owe our part of our evolution to fungi. Fungi and ants. Fungi and ants have a long-term relationship with one another. These go back tens of millions of years. Any zombification? Ants are one of the most prolific animals on the planet. Tropical rainforests, they're everywhere. They're most abundant animals, and their total biomass, how much they all weigh put together, is heavier than any other group of animals in the rainforest. There are many different kinds. And of all the insects in the rainforest, ant population, 70% are ants. And of them, specific type, the leafcutter ants are the most prolific herbivore, eating more vegetation than any other creature. when I was in one of the 2 Amazon expeditions with Professor Campbell, during the dry season, we camped, and you don't sleep on the ground, you sleep in your hammocks, as you know. And when I woke up, this isn't me, but woke up, here's a whole thing of leaf-cutter ants going all the way across here, down here, across here, over here. They went right through our thing. Pretty amazing. Of course, they've cut the leaves, and they're taking it back to their nest. So there's lots of ants. But the soil in the Amazon is found to host a large number of fungi. Not unexpected, right? Lots of them. So how ants became the world's best fungus farmers. So many of you know this story, but bears repeating. Humans have only been farming for about 10 to 12,000 years. Ants have been farming for nearly 50 million years, particularly the leaf-cutting ants, which more recently 8 to 12 million years ago. So what they do is cut these leaves, they take it to their burrow, and here's a big queen ant on the right, and all the little workers and all of the white stuff around and larvae. You can't see it in detail, but basically you take it down there, the fungus grows, it's nutrient rich, and that's what the ants feed all the babies, and that's what they eat. So all these ants are living on the fungus. They learned how to farm this. They've been pretty successful for their numbers over the years, correct? Now, we also know that many fungi can affect our brains and behavior, right? Peyotes, psychedelic mushrooms, doesn't take very much. A tiny amount will affect our behavior, doesn't it? Yeah. But what about ants? Ants going to eat some of these mushrooms? What's going to happen to them? So this is a picture of Cordyceps militaris, or the club head. Zombie ants. Zombie ants aren't just in the movies. They're organisms called parasites that take control of other species. Some of these parasites can turn animals into mindless slaves. As an ant looks for food, it might eat some spores of this parasitic fungus, Ophiocordyceps unilateralis. Or spore may just fall on its back. The fungus starts to grow in the ant, releasing chemicals that cause confusion. The ant may act kind of screwy. 3, the ant climbs up on a leaf, chomps down on the plant, and stays in place and is unable to release its jaws from the death grip. The fungus kills the ant, multiplies inside, and the fruiting body sprouts right out of its brain, out of its head, and releases more spores to the ground, and the cycle begins again. That's pretty macabre. So here's a picture of a death grip of the ant. Puts his pincers right around the leaf. And of course, the cordyceps fungus ball is sitting there releasing spores on unsuspecting ants down below. And this is a picture of a real ant a little late in the process. We did this after snack break. Now, the ant picks up this from spore, and we know that it grows besides the ant's brain, not in it. The spores go around it. That's interesting. Secretes metabolites to change the behavior of the ant, causing convulsions, but it eventually causes it to climb up to a leaf at a certain height and to bite down, and it causes lockjaw, only in the lockjaw muscles of the ant, not in any of the other muscles, and then on the death grip. Why are the ants dying so close to the ground? Well, when I was in the Amazon, as some of you have been, this is what you saw high in the trees. That's an Aztec ant nest in a cecropia tree. Why are the nests up so high? Well, if you've been in the Amazon in the wet season, it floods from 30 to 60 feet. So if you built your nest, ant nest, anywhere close to the ground, this is going to be taken out every year, right? So they're high in the trees. Well, ants live high in the trees, but they got to leave their nest to come down to the ground to forage, right? Yep. So the ideal height at which to release spores for maximum exposure to the species of ant is about 25 centimeters. So if you can drop spores from this level, you're going to bombard get the highest percent than if you release them up higher or lower. Each species of fungus has a very specific target location depending on its ants' host habits. Think about this. The death grip is always on the underside of the leaf, never on the top. It's almost always around a vein, so it's going to be sturdy and not fall off. It's almost exactly 25 centimeters from the forest floor. Certain range of humidity, about 90%, certain temperature, 20 to 30 degrees centigrade. Always where the rest of the ant colony will walk. It doesn't put it out someplace way out in the country, but where it's most likely. And a certain orientation on the north side of the tree. Now, how do you get an ant to figure all this stuff out? Not only figure out, but to do it, and do it with this precision. And it wants to be on the north side of the tree from UV light, which the fungus doesn't want to have. It doesn't want to come out with the sunlight around. But this new research has led people to liken cordyceps to a macabre puppet master. So it's just sitting there like controlling these ants. But how is the fungus pulling these strings? Through a cocktail of mind-bending drugs? But think of that. We just saw with the wasp earlier, that complex mechanism of different stings in different places and venoms. And then you're doing this to an ant, and you're just the fungus. You're just a spore that got on there, and you control the brain. Well, was it just the complicated neurotoxin mix that caused the behaviors? But now scientists are acting how this is going on. And now, with scanning, I don't know how they do this, electron microscope, they find out where in the ant is the fungus. And what they found, it's all around here and around here and around here and in the head, but it's not in the brain. Fungus is just around the brain. It's releasing chemicals that are changing some behavior. But now, when you find out what the fungal cells are, you find out that there's a network of mycelia around the major muscle groups of the ant. So there's all these like rhizomes, all these muscle different have actual strings hooked on them that are going to direct the ant. What's more, this network seems to leave the brain intact to do the other behavior, but to make the climbing and things, it's a combination. And we're only recently able to map this complicated network with the help of AI. So here's Homo sapiens using AI to show that this fungus is putting this complicated network in an ant. So it's a complex interaction of central nervous system control and, should I venture to say, use the word intelligent, purposeful, mycelic network that drives the very precise behavior of the ant. Intelligent, future directed. I want you to do this, 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 this. That requires some intelligence, however you want to do it. And for my benefit as a fungus, so I can reproduce. So just think and process the detailed control that these fungi control the ant's behavior. Pretty remarkable. When we used to dismiss them as a simple organism. Now there are over 500 species of cordyceps that have been identified. What do the ants do? Again, ants, this is a competition going on here. Well, Ants have some impressive group strategies to defend themselves. Of course, one of them is grooming. We've all seen ants groom one another. When grooming a nestmate that was exposed to more than one pathogen, the ants can even adjust their technique. They use their own antibiotic poison and reduce physical contact. If an ant comes along another one like this one, they go, this guy's toast. I'm just hauling him out of town like we did after the plague. You put him on the carts, you get him out of town as far as away, right? However, I don't know if some of you have done this, but you spill some beer on your table. If there's an ant around, the ant goes in and the ant drinks the beer. If you pay attention and watch a little bit, after 10 or 15 minutes, the ant comes out of the beer and the ant is walking drunk. So now, if they come on and see one of their buddies is just not walking right, it's drunk, or it's got one of these spores on it that they identify, several of the ants will take it far away from the nest, kill it, and very often they will kill themselves then also, because they don't want to bring it a chance that they would bring this back to the colony. Isn't that unbelievable social public health behavior in an ant? How long cordyceps been around? What happens if the environment changes? Two important questions. Complete fossil was found 48 million years ago in Germany. And when you magnify this area, leaves, and you can see the magnified spots where the pincers are on or have been on. So we know this species has been around a long time. Now, it first branched off the cordyceps over 100 million years ago. So this has been around a long time. But at least 4 times between 20 and 40 million years ago, researchers said that it branched again. It made some changes. Why would it make changes? Well, Father Darwin said that successful organisms must continue to evolve as their environments change or be relegated to the trash heap of extinction or something like that. So environmentalists see leaf biting as the typical behavior in zombifying ants in tropical forests. So this is where you find these ants. Notice they're in the tropics, right? And we know that rainforests extended well into the Arctic and the Antarctic at different epochs in the past, right? Well, major climate change occurred multiple times in cooling of the earth. Deciduous forests replaced the rainforests in the temperate climates. So we don't have a rainforest up here now. Well, what's going to happen to this cordyceps species? What's it going to do? It's going to mutate. It's going to change. So the fungus had to mutate with genetic changes to make the ants now do their death grip on either the twigs or the trunk bark. Because if you just hook on a leaf, every fall, all the leaves are going to fall off. That's not going to go well for you. Hence the diverse species of cordyceps today. So on this map you can see that up in the temperate climates, same species, but they do their death grip not on a leaf, on the bark. So there are multiple species of the cordyceps. They're around, and they've been around for a long time. Now, some of them just choose moths as hosts. Do the same macabre thing growing out of them. Some of them use grasshoppers. This logically leads us to an intriguing question. Could cordyceps or another fungus ever invade mammals or humans? If it got into other mammals, could it jump species, like COVID or other viruses, into humans? Good questions. Well, one fungus is very common and we're already very familiar with it. Athlete's foot, right? But before we go on with our prospect of fungus invading our bodies and brains, we need to consider another very common parasite that's already invaded Homo sapiens, something that's already in us. And that is toxoplasmosis and mind control. What's wrong with this picture? Who's acting stupid there? what should the mouse be doing? Duh, going the other way. Cat's going to eat them. So back in 1908, they saw this weird parasite in the bleed in the body and liver of a rodent. And 100 years ago, they found cysts in the retina of an infant who had hydrocephaly. And they named this Toxoplasmosis Gandhi. And this is what the drawing of the arc shape of the toxoplasmosis. And the life cycle of toxoplasmosis only can reproduce in a cat's gut. So the cat, again, is a primary host. Without cats, there's no toxoplasmosis, period. And what's the intermediate host? The rat. So the cysts get in the rat, the cat's got to eat the rat for this stuff to continue on, right? So, domestic cats. First of all, we find that worldwide, 30-40% of all the cats in the world have this toxoplasmosis in them, the cats. And feral cats that are outside hunting were more likely to have it than a house cat, right? Most cats shed these cysts only once in their lifetime, which I was surprised. Once in their lifetime, for only a period of 1 to 2 weeks. Then the cat, that's it. They're never infectious whatsoever. And so it's estimated only about 1% of cats at any time are actually shedding. But when they shed, they release millions of these ovocysts. And we don't have vaccines for them. And there's 600 million cats worldwide. And 60% of those now are household cats. So what is the cycle? And so the cat poops, has these cysts. Now, two things can happen. We could clean out their litter boxes, right? And maybe we could get a direct contact. Or the cat could be out in the barnyard and pig or somebody comes by, going around. It gets some of these cysts in it. So now the farm animals have this encysted in their meat, right? Or the rat more likely gets it because that really likes it. And now it's living in the rat. So so there's two ways that humans can acquire it, from the cats or meat of other mammals. Cat pee in rats. Here's the mind control. It induces epigenetic remodeling. Gee, where have we heard that epigenetic? With Dawkins, back in 80. We can make genetic changes in another animal or species with associated behaviors. So it causes these gene changes in the amygdala of the brain. And those are, the amygdala, that's the fear, the approach part of your brain. Makes changes in that with these gene modifying things. And another thing that goes on, rats who chase cats. Most rats that smell cat pee would run the opposite direction. Not those infected with the parasite Toxoplasma. They don't flee from danger. They're attracted to cat pee. So mice are going to come out of my basement looking for my cat pee. How stupid is that? And I don't have any fear, so here's this cat. Well, these mice call on it. Have we changed this mice's behavior to increase the likelihood it's going to be eaten? Of course, then it's eaten, goes in the cat, keeps the cycle going. Now, what about other mammals? I find this fascinating. This parasite makes wolves more likely to become leaders. Recent study at Yellowstone Park. 26 years of data covering 229 of the park's wolves. They could get blood samples from all these wolves and then observe them and find out what happened to them, because there's a blood test to check for this. The affected wolves were 11 times as likely as uninfected wolves to leave their packs. But they were 46 times as likely to become leaders. The finding fit with Gandhi's ability to boost boldness in a variety of other animals. So here, it's making a leader of a wolf pack. What about toxoplasmosis in humans? Well, we've gone through the cycle, and some of us have toxoplasmas in us. Usually it's asymptomatic. You can do a blood test to check it, and I'll talk about that later. But we know now, if you just check people in the world, half of them have these little cysts in us, but don't have symptoms. United States, about 11% of people. So of your audience, I don't know if you're typical, but about 11% of you have this in your brain, probably. And there's tentative evidence, underlying tentative, that infection may, underlying may, affect some people's behavior. So this is the insisted form that goes in our muscles and our brain. In late stages, it just sits dormant. But we know what can happen if it gets in a pregnant woman and she passes it on to the child. So hence we do the prenatal screening in pregnant women. But also people with weakened immune systems can cause big trouble. And this is a complicated slide, which I'm not even going to think about getting into. It just tells you it messes with the immune system. Well, so here's this dormant virus sitting up there, and maybe you've got it, and we check your brain and you say, oh yeah, there's this toxoplasmosis up there. But if you develop AIDS or HIV and your immune system goes south, the toxoplasmosis takes off and goes through your body, and it's likely to kill you. Increased risk of traffic accidents if you have toxmosis in you. Here's a study in Prague, traffic accidents from 1997 to 2000. They just take a look and, hey, you're in an accident, can we have your blood? Yeah. And you find out that's a pretty significant difference. The people who are in accidents and the ones that are not, of whether you're positive of this. Cause and effect, no, but that's interesting. Suicide attempts, traffic accidents. Other data on suicide attempts. So having his brain in your brain may do something, but we don't know what. Schizophrenia. Review meta-analysis, which means they looked at thousands or hundreds of different studies. And you find out that people that have chronic bad schizophrenia, 45% of them have the antibody in their blood and 30% of controls. Does your presenter have toxoplasmosis? He's a little crazy in his 3 cats. I know you're all thinking that, but I just thought I'd put it out there. Well, guess who had a hip surgery last week? And guess who asked in their pre-op lab, could you do a toxoplasmosis antigen study on me? Oh, it's not going to be covered by Medicare. I don't care how much it is. About $200. I go, hey, I want to know. If I'm crazy, I want to have an excuse. I don't know if I should tell you the results or not. Do you want to know? I don't have it. I'm just weird because I'm weird. I can't blame it on my cats. The final focusing question, that is, could any of the above organisms besides toxoplasmosis get into our bodies and change our behaviors? Is zombie-like behavior possible? Which leads me to conclude with recent zombie genre movies and books, such as Zombie Apocalypse, which I know you're all seeing. What conspiracy theories are out there now? They thought that COVID will lead to zombies. Well, I got me interested in apocalypse. What do people think about that? And from my BS class, I'm going, well, wait a minute, do people think differently about apocalypse? What do they mean by that? Well, if you're a Democrat, most likely climate change is most likely to take us out. Right? And what's number 2? You don't think apocalypse is going to come. If you're down here, card-carrying Republican, nuclear war, and Judgment Day. That's the second thing. An independent in between here with nuclear war. They don't think there'll be an apocalypse. And zombies, fortunately, only about 2% of all the groups are worried about zombies. Now, does the CDC have a plan? Because Nostradamus predicted there would be a zombie apocalypse in 2021. Don't think we had it. And the CDC is giving advice on how to prepare for it. And if you want to look it up, look up ConOps 88888. The Department of Defense has this scenario, or, what do they call it? It's just a training exercise, but I think it's kind of funny that they did that. So what are the proposed etiologies for zombie apocalypse? A virus that infects behavior, violence and biting. Big study in chimpanzees in 28 Days Later, a movie, escapes into the laboratory and crosses into humans. So here's a virus that chimpanzees have, and it makes the people, just like dogs, go rabid, and they bite you, and then you got it, and it just goes on and on and on. And we know that that happens. It goes to the nervous system, and your saliva becomes infected. My money is on fungi, particularly Orchiocordyceps on stalks. A great book and movie posits Orchiocordyceps, a variant, as the cause in this genre. And here's a dead body with stalk growing out of it, a human that had it. Most recently, the online popular series called The Last of Us, which I'm streaming, well, no, I did buy the disc to see. And this is caused by when spores got into our wheat, no, into the flour, big thing. And once it got in the flour, it got into bread and all the cooking, and that's how it got into us. And of course, when they're going around, they find people that have the fungus in the stalks, just like those ants that we saw. Pretty gross. So what are the chances that a virus or fungus could get into the human species and change our behavior and destroy our self-will? There's a new player on the block in South America. An old fungus in Brazil that's been around a long time called Sporothrix. It's just been out in the environment. Has now moved into cats. And since now there are 600 million cats in the world and rapidly increasing, could that fungus get into cats and cats into us? So concluding, maybe science fiction isn't too far-fetched at all. All this stuff that we thought about. And maybe there is a fungus among us. So, something to think about, and then I'll see if there's any questions.
Any questions?
I wondered what the carbon source would be for that forest of fungi that was around 50 million years ago or so.
It's not made out of carbon. It's not like wood. So the pulp, what we call the pulp of that, isn't the carbon from like wood. It's totally different. That's why everybody said this can't happen. Because you're right, there wasn't a carbon source. So it wasn't a woody type stuff. It's a different, totally different material. And they can make a leather out of, I didn't know, there's an industry around the world that makes leather out of fungi. You beat the crap out of it, and then but it makes a nice leather.
JR, I didn't notice any bats in the picture of rabies carriers. And I've often thought about that. Are bats rabies carriers?
Yes, bats are significant rabies carriers. Yep, absolutely. So if someone gets a bat bite, it's like, well, I was faced with this a lot in practice. Like, just send him and get all these shots. Or one of my patients, professor here who's not here, he caught the bat and we said, drive to Iowa City. And they did an autopsy on the bat and said, nope, doesn't have it. So you don't have to take all the shots. But if you don't find the bat, then you're kind of like, what are the odds?
You mentioned toxoplasmosis, but you didn't say anything about histoplasmosis. I'm a sufferer of histoplasmosis, which I think is a fungus that you inhale from bird droppings, and mine happens to have settled those fungi in my retinas. So I have ocular histoplasmosis. Maybe somebody else does too.
So that's a very good point. So there are different kinds of fungi. I picked on this one, but histoplasmosis, it's in the air. You go out to the southwest. There's other fungi floating around out there once they get in your body, but nobody's been a parasite to say, well, how can we use your body for type stuff? But yeah, but you're impressed that you don't get rid of this. There isn't just, oh, we'll just give a drug and kill it off.
That's all the time we have.
Just one quick comment. If people want to learn more about fungi, this month's National Geographic has a huge article on it.
Good point. There's a lot to learn.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all.
For educating and scaring and
Sleep well tonight.
we look forward to seeing everyone next Wednesday, April 10, when local author Monique Shore will walk us through the steps involved in writing, illustrating, and publishing her recently released book, No One is Better Than You, Edith Renfro Smith and the Power of a Mother's Words. See you all next week. Remember to turn on your cell phones.